Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the Presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Andrew Jackson, and the focus is retirement and legacy. Andrew Jackson had not been a well man, really wasn't for the last 25 years or so of his life. He was often emaciated, gastrointestinal challenges, back and forth, constipation and diarrhea. Of course, his main diet didn't help much, which was mostly coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. But whenever he needed to, he would always seem to rally, get his firm willpower coming forward so that he could perform his duties, whether it was on the battlefield or whether it was in the presidency of the United States. But even those last couple of months in office, he was not a well man. He spent most of those last 2 months in his bedroom, still operating the duties of the presidency, but unable to actually come downstairs because he was not a well man. He brightened up a bit, though, when Senator Thomas Benton came to visit him. Benton had, for the last couple of years, been trying in the Senate to get rid of the censure that the Senate had passed over Jackson about Jackson's removal of the funds from the Bank of the United States from a few years before. He had been censured, calling the acts unconstitutional. Jackson was offended by this, and Benton had been trying for a couple of years to get that expunged. And sure enough, after failure and failure, he finally succeeded. Just 2 months left into Jackson's term, by a vote of 24-19, the Senate passed a resolution that ordered the clerk of the Senate to come with the official records to the floor of the Senate, draw a big rectangle around that whole censure motion, and say right down there, expunged by order of the Senate, January 16, 1837. Benton was so excited, he rushed over to the White House and presented Jackson with a pen that was used to mark up the records. And Jackson responded to Benton by saying, "I sincerely thank you for this precious pen, which shall be carefully kept by me during life and shall by my last will and testament be bequeathed to you as its rightful heir. Not only as its rightful heir, but as an evidence of my high regard and exalted opinion of your talents, virtue, and patriotism," which is a bit of a change from the fact that these two men tried to kill each other back in 1813 over a dispute. But now Benton was on Jackson's side, so he was happy to expand on his favoritism toward him. They ended up aligned, and Jackson was more than pleased that the censure was gone. Jackson was really the first president to handpick his successor. Mostly that was left to others. Thomas Jefferson certainly had a favor for James Madison to be his successor, but Jackson was pretty clear. He wanted Martin Van Buren, his vice president and former Secretary of State, to take on the next presidency, and it was really for his own reasons, because he knew Van Buren would continue his policies, even though those policies, which Van Buren did continue, were pretty devastating in some cases. The economy was in the tank. After removing those funds, the specie circular, these were things that hurt the economy, but Van Buren continued them going forward. The whole relocation of the Indians, the Trail of Tears, also persisted. It got even worse under the Van Buren administration following Jackson's rule under the Indian Removal Act. But Jackson, this was what he wanted. He believed these were righteous causes. No one could convince him otherwise. And he was happy that Van Buren won and continued these policies. Jackson himself returned to the Hermitage, which actually had been lost in a fire, mostly damaged a couple of years before, but it had been mostly rebuilt, and he was able to settle into his home in a very happy mood after being cheered on his way back from the White House. He wrote to Van Buren after he got home, "I reached home somewhat improved in strength, but with a very bad cough. The approbation I have received from the people on my return on the close of my official life has been very gratifying to me. I have been everywhere cheered by my numerous Democratic Republican friends and many of the repenting Whigs with a hearty welcome. This is truly the patriot's reward and a source of great gratification to me, and will be my solace to the grave." Jackson always saw himself as a man of the people. The people were cheering him. He was feeling good about himself. Well, he had 8 more years left to live, and he was mainly stayed at home. He was very politically aware, followed everything, and on occasion he would become politically active on something that really mattered to him. He was very upset when Van Buren's term ended and he lost to William Henry Harrison. Harrison being a supporter of Henry Clay. Jackson thought this was a terrible thing for the country, and he was more than happy when Harrison died 1 month into office. Jackson said at the time that a kind and overruling providence has interfered to prolong our glorious union and happy Republican system, which General Harrison and his cabinet was preparing to destroy. under the dictation of the profligate demagogue Henry Clay. The Lord ruleth, let our nation rejoice. This is a former president of the United States rejoicing over the death of a subsequent president of the United States, but Jackson felt this was actually good for the country. In comes John Tyler, who was a Whig in name only. Tyler actually had left the Democratic Party because of a spat with Jackson. They had gotten into it, and Tyler said, enough's enough, I'm leaving. He became a Whig, he becomes vice president, now he's president of the United States. But he is still a Jacksonian Democrat at heart, and his policies actually Jackson very much favored, as Tyler was vetoing issues left and right coming from a Whig-dominated Congress. So while Jackson and Tyler didn't care for each other very much, Jackson actually enjoyed much of Tyler's presidency. Now, Martin Van Buren and John Tyler, William Henry Harris, and Andrew Jackson, all in this era had interest in what was going on in the southern region of the country in the area of Texas. During Jackson's administration, Texas had won its independence on the battlefield from Mexico, became an independent republic. He desperately wanted to bring Texas into the American Union. He was unable to do it. This was one area where Van Buren differed from Jackson because he thought outright annexation of Texas would bring war with Mexico, so he avoided the issue. But John Tyler was absolutely adamant that he was in it to get Texas back into the Union. He negotiated a treaty that the Senate rejected, but just at the end of his term, he went to a different approach. A joint resolution to Congress to bring Texas into the Union. That passed by majority vote in both houses, and Jackson could rejoice. I not only rejoice, but congratulate my beloved country, he said. Texas is re-annexed, and the safety, prosperity, and the greatest interest of the whole Union is secured by this great and important national act. This was the last major policy initiative that Jackson wanted to see fulfilled, and sure enough, it did. Just before the end of the Tyler administration. Jackson was also thrilled at Tyler's successor, the election of James Polk, who many called Young Hickory. Polk, also from Tennessee, he clearly was going to be an adherent to Jackson's policies, and Jackson was very pleased that he entered the White House just as Jackson was about to take his last breath. Jackson was again ill. He was not going to rally this time, and eventually he had all his family around him. He had actually become a little bit more religious man. That was much more the prominence of his wife throughout their lives, but later in life, Jackson did take on more religious overtones, and with his family around him, he said, "Oh, do not cry, be good children, and we will all meet in heaven." Minutes later, Andrew Jackson died June 1st, 1845, at the age of 78. Jackson was a transformational figure in American history. He was the first to rise from humble beginnings to the presidency of the United States, much of which the American dream, the idea that somebody could come from nothing to be the leader of the country. He showed the power of his will, overcoming almost any barrier. He was a battler. He fought for everything, and he was merciless. He viewed things in black and white terms, life and death. He had duels individually, duels on the battlefield, duels in politics. Like he said at the Battle of New Orleans, his greatest triumph militarily, you were either with him or against him. There was rarely any middle ground. And if you went at Andrew Jackson, you better learn, because you're going to learn the hard way. He's going to come back at you even more, and more often than not, he was going to win, sometimes in fights to the death. Now, many were against Andrew Jackson. He thought he was dictatorial. He was a horrible subordinate. He took only his own counsel, defied orders, defied the Constitution. He committed acts of war in defiance of his superiors, but with the full confidence of the righteousness of his actions. He forced relocation of an entire race, somehow convincing himself that it was in their best interest and nothing was going to stop him. He put checks and balances at risk in the federal union in his new version of the role of the President of the United States as the primary representative of the people. Checks and balances, not so sure. It wasn't just the co-equal branches of government, the presidency, the judiciary, and the legislature. He felt he was in many ways independent of those other branches of government, where he could overrule them and do what he thought was in the best interest of the people. That's how he viewed the presidency and his connection with the American people. In many ways, it was what the founders feared most, an executive who wouldn't care about checks and balances and perhaps be a commander-in-chief using dictatorial mechanisms. This was very much part of the presidency of Andrew Jackson, but one that he had no qualms about and felt was righteous, and in the best interest of the American people. And by and large, the people loved him for it. They loved his bold, brash ways, that nothing could faze him, that he didn't care about sort of the institutional norms and what the establishment cared about. He cared about what the people cared for, and that he was not going to let others thwart his will. He was their person, their leader, looking out for their interests like no one before. The people's president who oversaw expansion of the vote, put the people more centered in American democracy than they ever had been before, and set the tone for years to come. In many ways, he was King Andrew I, not merely a president of the United States, but for the most part, the people loved him for it. That is Andrew Jackson, Retirement and Legacy, from the life of Andrew Jackson. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.